What's up guys and welcome to Wicked Pixels. I'm here with the first in the video series called Learn to Slay, where I'm going to teach you the fundamental basics of Slay the Spire 2. If you're a beginner to the genre or even to Slay the Spire in general and you're wanting some tips on how to be more successful in your runs, then this is the video series for you. Rather than just giving you a cookie cutter build guide, I'm actually going to take you through the game step by step to try and help you make more informed choices and make your runs more successful. So without further ado, let's get cracking with the very first step of the dungeon run. We're going to talk to Niao and we're going to see what choices he's got to offer. Okay, so we're just going to make a start by loading up the game. I've already started this one, so we're running into the Ironclad. This is only low ascension ranks and we get these 3 random choices from Niao. Now, it's important to understand a few fundamentals, and if you've listened to my basic tips video so far, you probably understand some of these already. So, this is all contextual, it depends on what character we're choosing. Each character has different selection of cards that they have available with different mechanics. In the case of the Ironclad, we have a large health pool, we've got lots of ways to increase our health, we've got lots of ways to damage ourselves to increase strength or to have other effects. We've got lots of access to exhausting cards, so we don't mind putting new cards into our deck as much as some of the other classes. And also we have a way to heal at the end of each combat with our starting relic of Burning Blood, which is incredibly useful. It means that we can sort of leverage our health as a currency a little bit better than most classes because we're constantly regenerating that as long as we're having decent battles. So if we create a strong build, we're going to be able to recoup any health that we spend on events or even at the start of the game when we make this choice. Now you can think about things like the Silent as being classes that can easily cycle through cards or discard cards that are going to cause negative effects. We've also got some of the new classes who have their own mechanics that we'll probably look into in some other videos a bit later on. So we always start with 99 gold as standard, and we always start with 10 cards in our deck. So out of these 10 cards that we start with, we generally want to think about the strikes and defense as being the weakest cards in the game. So there are obviously cards that are more detrimental, and this is obviously depends on what kind of build we're actually running, because in some cases you can leverage basic strikes or basic defense to quite powerful effects. But generally speaking, out of the gate, these are very weak cards that we really don't want in our deck. And that's important to remember as we go through, and it's important to remember while we're choosing the Neo blessings at the start of the game as well. The aim of the game in most roguelike deck builders in most cases is to try and reduce the amount of cards you've got in your deck by as much as you can, so that any new cards that you're adding in that have powerful effects will cycle around much quicker, so you get to use them again and again. So that's the general rule of thumb, is that removing these cards is really positive, and adding in obviously stronger cards to a smaller deck pool is much stronger. One thing to remember here is that each class also comes equipped with its own class specific card. In this case it's Bash for the Ironclad. These cards tend to be very useful, and in most cases can sort of tie into some of the mechanics of the class. There is also the opportunity usually to upgrade these about halfway through a run if you're lucky, and I would always recommend that you think carefully about taking those, because they're very strong cards just out of the box. Doesn't really depend on what build you've got. Most of them work in most instances as a very strong card. So that's the kind of the idea, is that we're looking to reduce the amount of cards we've got, reduce the amount of strikes and defense, and then replace them with much stronger cards if we can. There's lots of different ways of doing that as we go through the run, and this is going to be one of the first choices that will impact on that and how effective our deck is going to be in this first map. We're going to talk a little bit about the map in the next video. I'm going to talk you through about how to choose the path and what's the most efficient way to do this. But obviously, again, this is all contextual. It's important to remember in these videos that there's no right or wrong answers, there's no right or wrong choices, there's only things that tend to be better and tend to have more of an impact, and things that maybe might hold you back more than you realise. So without further ado, let's have a little look at the 3 options that we've got from Niao. So the first one is Niao's Torment. Add 1 Niao's Fury to your deck. So this is a 1-cost attack card that deals 10 damage, which is a pretty good amount for 1 energy. It also has the effect of putting 2 random cards from your discard pile into your hand. So that's a really powerful effect if we can return 2 cards that we've just played back into our hand. However, first of all, it doesn't play them, so we've still got to have the energy to play the cards. And secondly, it's random, and I think this is the biggest thing. So we would have to guarantee 2 cards that we desperately want to play. Those generally would have to be cards that are quite low cost, so that we can actually afford to play them. And we need to guarantee that it was the 2 cards we wanted, because we've already played them in. So if we play 3 or 4 cards, there's no guarantee you're going to get the cards that you want back. This is also an exhaust effect, so once you play Niao's Fury, it's been and gone, and that's it. So I don't see this as being a particularly strong card. I do believe there's a way to upgrade this later in the game to be much more effective. But early in the game, when you've not got particularly strong cards in your deck anyway, dealing the 10 damage is great, but having the 2 random cards come back into your discard is not all that useful. It might be useful in a situation where you may be looking to block because you've got big incoming damage, and you're going to play a block and you've only got 1 in your hand, and you've got this card, so then you can return the block and play that again. But that, again, seems to be quite contextual, and it really depends on the situation. Generally speaking, not a great pick, and I wouldn't recommend this one. So the next one we've got is Golden Pearl. Upon picking, pick up, gain 150 gold. Now, this may seem like quite a small amount, and in terms of a full run, it probably is. However, out of the gate, when we've already started with 99 gold, adding an extra 150 gold puts us on 249 straight out the gate. So this is actually a really strong effect. There's no downside here, and the reason why I say it's a strong effect is because we're going to usually have a merchant within the first couple of nodes in most maps. So we've got a merchant here, we can hit that on the second, and we also have one up here if we want to sort of save up a bit more on the way. There's usually one a bit further up as well, so if we look, there's another one right near the end. And the reason why 150 extra gold is going to be so strong for us is because it gives us options in terms of starting to look for keystone cards that are going to help us form a build as we move up. Generally speaking, in lower ascension ranks, it's not so big a deal, but in higher ascension ranks, you're going to want to get hold of some really powerful defensive cards early on, because it's going to give you sustain enough that you can then build up your attack and be able to get through the fights quickly. You can kind of muscle your way through the lower ascension ranks with a lot of classes and builds. The Ironclad is really, really good at doing this. There's lots of builds where you will leverage your own health to give yourself strength to then hit harder. You can actually just finish fights with a single whirlwind in some cases, but having 150 gold means that when you go into shops, you can potentially pick up a relic straight away. That could be really intrinsic to your build. It could also mean that you pick up a couple of cards, maybe you hit one on discount, and it could mean that you manage to pick up a really powerful gold card straight off the bat, which you can then build around. So having 150 extra gold is really, really good. It also opens up the door for, if you've got 2 merchants, one after the other, in this case we don't, but if we hit 2 merchants quite early on, we can actually remove 2 cards from our deck quite quickly, and that will put us in a much better position when we start adding more powerful cards as well. So for me, this is a strong pick. It's not the strongest, but it's definitely a good pick, and it's got no downsides. Now, Precarious Shears, remove 2 cards from your deck, take 13 damage. So I need to explain why this is one of the strongest effects that you can pick from Niao. So removing 2 cards from your deck. So we start with 10 cards, now remove 2, we're now down to 8. So if you draw 6 cards in a turn, then you're going to hit, effectively you're going to hit your most powerful card in the first or second turn of a fight. And in most cases, if that card is something like a power, it means that you're going to get to use that power much, much earlier. So reducing cards from your deck, as I mentioned, is very powerful. It means that you're more likely to hit the important cards you need in the first turn of the fight. Taking 13 damage for some classes is quite a big hit. Lower ascension ranks, not too big a deal, but higher is much more impactful. However, for the Ironclad, we can heal 6 HP potentially each fight as long as we block in everything. So within two battles, we're going to have netted that 12 damage back, so almost cancel that out completely. So that's not a downside at all. Removing 2 cards from the deck is going to mean that we've got a much more streamlined, much more efficient deck. And once we start adding in some extra cards, that's going to really help in terms of killing those elites quicker. It's going to make elite farming much easier, which then gets us more relics, which helps us to snowball into a really powerful build early on. Okay, so we're going to reset, and then we're going to come back and we're going to have a look at the next 3 options. Okay, so the next 3 that we've got from Niao, we've got some slightly different ones this time. We've got remove 1 card from your deck, which is really useful. One of the things I would say here is that if you had 150 gold and this one, the 150 gold could be leveraged. 75 gold is for your first remove a card. So if you've got a merchant early, which it almost always is, then you take that 150 gold, you can actually remove the card yourself and still have some profit. You still have another 75 gold left. So you've sort of netted 75 gold. So this one is a very strong effect, but the 150 gold one for me is actually slightly more effective. This is just straightforward, remove a card from your deck with no downsides. That's a very strong effect. It's definitely something that we need. Remember that removing cards from your deck does increase in cost as you go through the runs as well, so there is that to consider. But for me, this is always a strong pick. Now, next one is small capsule. Obtain a random relic. Relics can be incredibly strong, and they can be, in some cases, they can really make or break a build. However, the relics that you're going to get from this choice are going to be the most common relics, and they're usually things like give you one-time effects that aren't particularly strong. For example, upgrade a couple of cards or a little bit of gold. I guess the main issue with this is it's completely random, and the ones that you tend to get are not that strong. So I wouldn't recommend picking this one. You might get lucky and hit something decent, but generally speaking, you don't get anything that's worth your time. So the last one is much more interesting. So Leafy Poultice transforms one of your strikes and one of your defends. You lose 10 max HP. So let's just talk about the downside here. So losing 10 max HP for, again, any other class other than the Ironclad, this can be quite impactful, quite a blow, especially on higher Ascension ranks. However, the Ironclad starts with 80 HP, so the highest in the game. There's also lots of ways for the Ironclad to increase that. For example, if you hit the card Feed and you manage to kill enemies within the battle, that can increase your health. There's relics that can do it, and there's also events that can do it. So for us as the Ironclad, this isn't a huge downside, and it's something we can definitely live with. For a character class such as the Silent or the Necrobinder, who has much lower health pools, this could be a much bigger chunk of health, and they've got fewer ways to kind of mitigate that. So it's something to bear in mind. When we look at the positives, however, transforming one of your strikes and one of your defends. Now, we know removing cards is very, very strong. Transforming kind of serves the same purpose. It removes the cards that we don't want, and it replaces them with cards that potentially we may or may not want. So there is an element of randomness to this. However, it's almost guaranteed that any card you put into your deck that's not a strike or defend will be a better card in some way. It might not quite synergize with the build that you've got. In some cases, in very rare cases, you might hit a card that's actually going to be detrimental to your build. However, 9 times out of 10 you're going to hit 2 cards that are better, and you remove the cards that you don't want. So this is actually a really, really strong effect, and this is the one that I would go for. Certainly when I'm playing the Ironclad, the downside is not massive, and therefore we'll have a little look and just see what this one gives us. So it takes out 2. So we've got Taunt, which gives us 7 block and 1 vulnerable on the enemy. This is really good for a vulnerable build, of which there are lots of new cards that synergize around this. So we've got Bash, we've got Taunt, we've got cards that will do more damage based on how much vulnerability there is on the boss. We've got cards that just add flat vulnerable, and we've also have relics that increase the amount of damage that the enemy takes from having vulnerable. And then we've also got Juggling. So add a copy of the third attack you play each turn into your hand. This is actually a really good card to synergize with 0 cost attacks like Anger. This is a really powerful ability where effectively any card that scales its own damage whenever you hit. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but there's a card where when you play it, it does damage, and then effectively the next time you use it, it increases its own damage. This could be a really, really strong effect for that. Okay, here we go for the last one. So we've got Arcane Scroll again, obtain a random rare card. Already talked about this one, really good strong pick, and I would recommend it almost every time. We've got Transform one card. Again, we've talked about transforming as being a form of removal, but instead of just removing the card, we're actually replacing it, and usually we get something better than what we took out. So this is always a good shout. Silver Crucible, the first 3 card rewards you see are upgraded. The first treasure chest you open is empty. This is a very, very weak one. The reason being that the first 3 card rewards you see are upgraded. Upgraded cards are great, but there might be 3 cards that we just don't want. It's potluck. What we're kind of looking to introduce, the only things we're going to be adding to our decks straight off the bat is if we get very, very rare cards which look like they've got a really strong effect. That's always a good way to go. Or if we're kind of looking for those keystone abilities that are going to set a build off. For example, Bash. So if I pick a Bash up very early on and I upgrade that to a 0 cost, I've pretty much got one of the main pieces I need to start forming a block build. So I'm looking for cards like that only. So in the first few rewards, I don't get to choose which ones come upgraded. It's very much a case of potluck, and I might find no cards that I actually need. So that is a potential waste of a reward. The other thing is comes with a huge downside, which is the first treasure chest you open is empty. There's always a treasure chest about halfway up the map. So this will be the first one that we find unless we get lucky in an event. And having that being empty means we're going to have one less relic for the run, which is a massive downside. Relics can be very, very powerful, and they can open up new avenues of play. So for me, missing out on the relic is far too big a downside. And in fact, the positives of this are so weak that I probably wouldn't want them anyway. Even if there wasn't a downside, I wouldn't choose Silver Crucible at all. Okay, so that's it for the first episode. We've talked through a few of the positives and the negatives that you can get from Niau's Blessing. So just to recap, we're talking about adding gold is usually really strong, removing cards is excellent, and also transforming cards as an alternative to removing can also be really, really strong. For me, the strongest effects that you can pick up here are the rare rewards, such as a rare card or a rare relic straight out of the gate. That's going to really help you power through the first zone and hopefully farm elites on your way up the tower. The things that we're kind of avoid, we don't mind taking health damage too much, especially when you're playing the Ironclad. Taking max health damage is a bit more serious, but again, depends on your Ascension level. If you're lower Ascension level, don't worry about it too much. If you're higher Ascension level, you may need to consider the character that you're playing. If we're going to take curses on board, that's massively impactful and that can actually finish a run. So just be very careful about that, especially picking up that curse card that you can't remove from greed. We've also got adding random cards. Adding random cards for me can usually obviously just be random, and it doesn't always mean that you're going to get anything positive out of that. That said, this is the start of a run, and you can quite easily just quit the game and relaunch it if you didn't hit the thing that you want. So that's always something to consider. Finally, we've got things not appearing when they should. For example, the relic not appearing in the first treasure chest. One to avoid, especially considering the positives of that one were very, very weak. So hopefully, guys, that gives you some idea about how to start your runs in Slay the Spire 2. Stay tuned for our next video where I'm going to talk about the map and how you choose your path through the dungeon. Alright, see you next time. Peace out.